I know what you're thinking. If I could just get more listens, everything would work itself out. If I could just get more listeners, everything would get better. If I could get exposure to a larger audience, I would not have most of the problems I have today as a podcaster. Podcast Growth Nation, welcome to today's episode number 149, one metric you're probably not looking at enough. Over the course of working with hundreds and hundreds of podcasters, the thing that I've heard the most from people is, well, if I had a bigger audience, everything would be fine. Or when I get to a certain size audience, I'm sure this will work itself out. And unfortunately, it's the old chicken or the egg adage. What has to come first? What came first, the chicken or the egg? And for a lot of us, that's the way we're approaching this. And I think most of us, unfortunately, are being misled. So the analogy I always use for this is if you have a hole in your bucket, it doesn't really matter how much water is going into your bucket because it's all going to leak out eventually. Now, yes, if you have a very, very small hole and you have a lot of water going in, it's not necessarily apples to apples. But I think for a lot of us, we have a very big hole in the bucket and we have a very small amount of water going in, which leads to us feeling like we're doing a lot of things right and putting in a lot of effort, but getting very little reward out of it. So that's always the analogy I use. Oftentimes, people will tell me they want more listens. And you've heard me say this before. One of the best ways to get more listens is to get your audience to listen to more episodes. So if the average person that is subscribed to your podcast only listens to one episode per month, and you do 4, we have to make sure that we get them to listen to more of those. Right? That's one piece of this. The second piece that we're talking about, and we're going to be talking about it today, is getting people to listen for longer. So the one metric you're probably not looking at enough is retention rate, is consumption rate, depending on where you're finding this stat. And all that means is, on average, how long is somebody listening to your episode? So here's why this is a hole in the bucket. Sure, let's say you go give a speech to 1,000 people, and at the end, you have a very powerful plug to your podcast. Awesome, I love that. You know I love that. But your retention rate, your consumption rate is 25%. So that means on average, people are only listening to 25% of your episode. There's a lot of suggestions that come from that. 1, maybe the quality isn't great. 2, maybe the topic wasn't aligned. 3, you're taking too long to get into the value. There's a million reasons why. 4, your guest audio is terrible. So if you have a guest on and their audio isn't good, that's going to kill your consumption rate. That's going to kill your retention rate. That's not good. So yeah, 1,000 people had the opportunity to listen to your podcast, but only 250 of them made it to the end. Now, if those 250 listen to the next episode, only 25% of them are going to make it to the end. And you can see how this is going to continue and continue and continue to essentially lose your audience, unfortunately. So I think it's really easy for us to start a podcast, fall into the flow of this is how I do it, this is how I do it, and forget that at the end of the day, the good content is what shines through. Now, good content is not enough. We have to do other things. But this is one stat that I think most people just don't even look at, and most people don't even know it exists. So let's talk about how to access it. Again, I know I've talked about this in the past, but I have done so many calls recently, and so many of these podcasters I've spoken to did not even know this stuff existed. So it's super valuable, and maybe you know it, but if you're not practicing it, there's value. So make sure you don't can out of here. I promise you'll get something out of this. All right. So for Apple, go to Apple Podcast for Creators. So if you just search Apple Podcast for Creators, it'll come up. It used to be Apple Podcast Connect. They're changing that. For Spotify, log into creators.spotify.com or Spotify for Creators. You can just Google that and it will come up. You'll be able to log into your profile on each of those. So let's do Apple first. So when you log into Apple, it will bring you to your podcast page, and then you're going to want to click on Analytics. And when you click on Analytics, it will take you to the main hub of your Apple Podcast Connect page, and there'll be a bunch of numbers. And there'll also be a couple tabs. So there'll be overview, trends, episodes, and performance. So if you click on overview and scroll down, probably 2 scrolls, you will see at the bottom a list of your recent episodes. And it'll say the episode name, the release date, duration, listeners, engaged listeners, plays, and average consumption. So at any time, if you're going to go do this, just pause, whether it's the video or the audio, and then you can come along with me on the journey. The last column will say average consumption. The average consumption is how much of an episode is consumed by listeners on average, right? Simple. I was looking up data because, again, it's hard to find certain data on this stuff. I was looking up data to figure out what are the above average numbers. So what I came up with for audio is 40 to 60% average completion is considered good. 60 to 80% is excellent. And then over 80% is rare. And it usually means that the content is super engaging and probably short form. Makes sense, right? If you do a 2-minute episode and somebody stays for 1 minute and 40 seconds, that's going to be 80% consumption. We do have like a fair amount of episodes in the 80s. Let me see. One episode we had last month or 2 months ago has 97% consumption. I would say our average is probably, I don't know, probably like 75 or 80, gently looking at the numbers. If you have episodes that are over 100, that means the same person listened to it multiple times. So that's something. That's a really good suggestion, right? So that's in Apple. So we're looking for average consumption in Apple. In Spotify, which is now Spotify for Creators, log into your account, go to episodes, then click on an actual episode. Boom. Then we are going to scroll down to where it says Spotify audience retention. And then you can just look at the graph. Again, this graph is not great, but it will tell you how many people got to the end of your episode. So one of the ones I'm looking at from a couple months ago, 67% completed it. But it breaks it down somewhat nicely because you can see that for the vast majority of the time, there was 100%. And then a bunch of people fell off towards the end where the call to actions are. That's good. That's good data. If you were to do this for all of your episodes, like every week you go in after the episode's been live for 7 days and go through this, I feel like you would have a really good understanding of what's working and what's not. So very easily put, Apple has better analytics on a lot of things. I think the consumption is okay, but I prefer the graph that Spotify has as opposed to the graph that Apple has. I think the Spotify graph is just easier to understand. Let me pull up one here just so I can... Yeah, I would say it's easier to understand, honestly. So I would probably look at Spotify for your retention, and then Apple is going to have a lot of other stats. I guess it's not necessarily other stats, it's just positioned in a different way, is what I would say. But if you dive into this data, there's a lot you can gather. So I'm looking at an episode right now that we did earlier this year that has 102% consumption. What does that mean? That means that somebody listened to certain parts of this multiple times. Somebody or several somebodies. Okay, why? Was that episode really strong in story? Was that episode shorter? Was that episode longer? There's a lot of different things that jump off the page. If I find one that has like a 50% consumption rate, okay, why? What is it about that? Was it longer? Was it shorter? Were we rushing that episode? Like, what can we gather from the data?
I just wanted to take a quick second and give a shout out and a huge thank you to Next Level Podcasting Solutions, Kevin and his team. They have been incredible to work with, very flexible, on the spot with any questions that I have or any concerns that I have. When I first started out my podcast, I was doing everything on my own. I have no editing background. I have no podcasting background. I knew nothing about it. And so I was bootstrapping all of this myself while I was still trying to take on my role as a full-time mom. And once I met up with Kevin and we had these discussions and I got on board with adding an editing team, oh my goodness, it just lifted this weight off of me. It lifted my time that I was spending doing my editing. And in the beginning, full transparency, when I was editing just my individual recordings, it was a little more manageable, not super manageable. And then when I started doing my interviews for the podcast, it was hours upon hours of me doing the editing that didn't include any of the promotional material that I am now getting from Kevin and his team. It wouldn't have been sustainable. I would not have been able to keep up with that. So I recommend Kevin and his team. They have done wonderful work in helping me grow my podcast. I have really enjoyed working with the editing team, and it definitely feels like more of a team environment versus me hiring them to do a specific job. I mean, we all work collaboratively on the projects that I have, and I have these crazy ideas sometimes, and they come up with a solution to fit my needs. I can't recommend them enough. I really enjoyed working with them. Kevin and the Next Level Podcasting Solutions, thank you so much for the work that you have done in the past and are continuing to do for me. I'm growing this community and growing this platform with a beautiful team that is working for me and with me to see my vision and help that come to life. So thank you again so much. I really appreciate you guys.
I was never the data guy. I was never the guy who enjoyed data. I was never the guy who liked looking at it. But it has given me so much certainty of what works and what doesn't. And as a coach, I kind of have to have data, because I can't just say, well, I feel like you should do it this way. We have to look at the data to suggest what's going to work and what's not going to work. So I think for a lot of us, the common issue that we struggle with when it comes to this is, one, we don't know what data to look at. Two, we don't know what the numbers mean in comparison to what's good and what's not good. So we'll go over that quickly again. 40 to 60% consumption is average. So if you're 40 to 60%, you're probably in the average bucket. If you're below that, that's a really good opportunity for an improvement. 60 to 80% consumption is excellent. And then anything over 80% is really good. It's rare. That's very, very rare. If you're over 80%, that's a really good suggestion. Now, if you only have one person listening to each episode, obviously that skews the data, but that's a suggestion that your content is sticky. So even that, it's okay if you only have 5 people listening and they're listening to 90%, because that suggests that if you were to get an influx of people, they most likely would listen to the majority of the episode. So that's a big piece, is a lot of us don't know where to look. As I mentioned earlier, we think that, well, if I just got more listens, if I just had more listeners, then I would be fine. No. That's like a restaurant that has bad food and bad reviews thinking that more customers are going to equal more business. No, it's going to probably equal more disappointment, unfortunately, and more questions of why isn't this working? Why aren't people sticking around? That's a big piece of it. And then the third thing, and the third place I think a lot of us get stuck, is we think that time is going to fix it. Well, if I just do this for long enough, those numbers will change. In theory, they can, right? In theory, they can change as long as you're improving and your guests are improving and you're understanding the flow of it and you're looking at the numbers. The numbers most likely will not change if you don't look at them and then use that as feedback and then use that as a strategy moving forward. That's a really big piece of it. I was talking to somebody recently, and we were looking at the consumption rate on one of their episodes. And it was bad. It was really, really bad. We're talking well below 40%. It was probably like 15%. And I said, all right, well, let's look. Let's look at this. And the guest's audio was just terrible. And there was no, I mean, the team did their best to do what they could do in post-production. There was nothing we could do. And I said, that's the problem. So we have to revisit your pre-flight checklist. We have to update the fact that you are going to have discretion on whether or not you actually want to record an episode with this person. If somebody shows up and their audio is not good, that is hurting the algorithm. That's most likely annoying your audience, and it's hurting the quality of your podcast. It's up to you to say whether or not you want to have that person on. And I said, I know it feels bad, and I know it feels like you're the bad person for doing this. We had interviews scheduled where somebody would show up and we would say, hey, do you have a mic or do you have wired headphones? Because we had a pre-flight checklist that we sent that had requirements for that. And if they said no and the audio quality was too bad, we would literally say, we're sorry, but we're not going to be able to do it today. Happy to reschedule if you can have the proper equipment, but we can't do this. We can't have you logging in to this meeting in an echoey, dark closet. Like, that's not going to work. It's not going to work. So we had to pass on a lot of those interviews. At the end of the day, it's our job as the hosts to cultivate and create the most high quality content possible, right? And the hard thing about having guests is oftentimes that's out of your control. The easy thing about doing solos is you can kind of control it. And again, this is why the guest solo thing I talk about so often matters. I would venture to guess that it's probably a little bit easier to increase your retention with solo episodes because you're in more control. So you can do a powerful hook, then you can transition into a story, and it's just, you can reverse engineer it a little bit better. When you have a guest on, they're going to say what they say. Their responses might be long, they might be short, they might do their bio and it might be too long. There's a lot of things that can kind of go wrong. So it depends. As always, it depends. All right, takeaways. Let me give you some takeaways here before we get out of here. One, if you have a hole in the bucket, we have to focus on patching that. So let's get into the numbers. And if I could give each and every one of us homework from this episode, it would be look at your analytics, give yourself your top 5 episodes with the highest consumption rate, the top 5 lowest, and then figure out to a degree what your average is, and then see if you can connect some dots. Okay, I remember I had this guest on, and I remember they were a really powerful storyteller. Let me see if that episode did better. Oh, it did. Interesting. Okay, I remember I had this guest on, and their audio quality was not it. All right, let me go check to see if that hurt it. Oh, it did. My consumption rate was much lower. Oh, interesting. That way, at least you feel like you're in more control. It's like driving a car with no speedometer. You don't know how fast you're going. It's really easy to get pulled over. It's really easy to run out of fuel. It's really easy to everything. It's really easy to do certain things, and it's really hard to predict where you're going to end up because you don't know how fast you're going. So you don't know how long it's going to take. This is one of those things. This is one of those awarenesses that we need to have. Now, do I want you to obsess over the numbers? No. But if you had to obsess or never look, I would say obsess because at least you're going to get data. You can always dial that back. So that's one thought. The second thought is when you're consuming other people's content, think to yourself, when do you tune off? When do you tune out? Is it when they get to the end and they talk about the calls to action? Okay. Is it something that happens in the middle? If there's a mid-tro? Okay. Then you can test that stuff on your content and see if it works and see if it affects your retention rate. Consumption rate, retention rate, same thing. If you haven't upgraded your mic in a long time, this might be time to try that. Cool. If you put music behind your episodes, this might be a time to try not doing that. Cool. If you do a certain introduction for guests, a certain bio read, that might be hurting your consumption rate. Okay, let's test not doing that. There's a bunch of different ways to do this. One easy thing, not necessarily easy, one maybe lower barrier to entry thing is do a cold open on your podcast. So the part you heard in the beginning where I talked about the answer to your problems probably isn't more listeners, whatever I said, I read that first, then I did the intro, and then I got into the episode. So that's the way we've been doing it, is we're just doing a cold open. Rather than pulling something out of the episode and then putting it at the beginning for the first 15 to 20 seconds, now I'm just doing it live, and then Alan and I are doing it live for Next Level You. So if you've ever watched a sitcom, all the cold open is when they start the episode, they just get right into it. They have like a full scene, and then they do the intro. Same thing for you. Does it help your consumption rate? I'm willing to bet it probably will, because you're hooking people with value. Then they'll sit through the intro. Then they'll actually figure out or want to figure out what the episode's about. So that might be one lower barrier to entry. Two ways to do it. One, you just think to yourself, okay, this episode is one metric you're probably not looking at enough. Okay, what's a hook? The answer to your problems, believe it or not, probably is not getting more listeners. It's making sure that the listeners you get stay. And today we're going to talk about 3 ways how to do that. Boom. That's the hook. I just do that live. Then I say, welcome to today's episode. You can do that, right? And in between that will be the branded intro. Or you can just do the episode the way you would normally do it, go back and listen, and then find 15 to 30 seconds of you or your guest saying something super valuable, copy that, throw that at the beginning of the episode, then have the branded intro, bada bing, bada boom. I would test that and see how that affects your consumption rate, because I'm willing to bet it'll probably do something. All right, cool. All right, if you need help with anything we talked about today, even if it's like the audio editing part on how to do that, I will have my link in the show notes for a free 30-minute podcast breakthrough session, and we can jam on that or whatever else it is. We have a private Facebook group called Podcast Growth Nation, where we will be posting at least 5 days a week starting next week. So we're getting back into the flow of things. I know I have been dropping the ball on that. Things have been mayhem behind the scenes, and unfortunately, I took my eye off the ball. So we're getting back into that. So if you're looking for a group that is all about podcasting and all things podcasting, that will be in the show notes as well. I hope you're looking at your damn data, and I hope you're rebuilding your relationship with it if that's something that's new to you. And again, if I can be of help in any way, just let me know. Reach out. All my stuff's in the show notes. I'm not going to ask you for money to help you with stuff. Like I will give away as much as humanly possible. I love doing that. That's one of the reasons I started this in the first place. So I'll make sure that is always a thing. And what else do I hope for you? That's the big thing. I hope you're looking at the data, and I hope your relationship with it is better than it's been in the past. And for those of you listening, I have the studio lights off today. It is a nice, beautiful day in New Hampshire. It's going to be like 60 degrees today. I obviously have the window closed, unfortunately, but I was like, you know what? I'm feeling a more relaxed vibe. I'm not going to have the bright-ass studio lights on. So let me know if you watched it. Let me know if you like this lighting better than the previous. All right. Until next week, keep on crushing it, keep on podcasting, and I will talk to you all then.